Hello, my happy Crumpin' Wargamers. Today we're going to move on with our tutorial. So the first part of this series was going to be on the movement phase, and if you watched it, it was awesome. I got a lot of positive feedback from it, so we're going to keep it coming. Today we're going to learn how to perform in the shooting phase. The reason why I'm doing these videos is because the rulebook, it's a bit of a bear, and if you're on your own trying to figure this stuff out, Godspeed and good luck. So we're gonna basically make sure all of the fundamentals of the game are super easy and clear to understand, and we're gonna walk it through. I'm not just gonna be reading the rules to you. What I'm gonna do is, after I read you the rules and I explain the way certain interactions work, I'm gonna switch to the TTS view and then show you how it works. So this works really well in my career as kind of like an educator. So hopefully this works super well for you guys learning Warhammer and how to be awesome crumpers, because we got a crump. All right, but today this isn't necessarily crumping. This is more DACA. So the shooting phase. How does the shooting phase perform? First off, this is what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about inside the shooting phase. Who's eligible to shoot? The keywords, selecting different targets. How do monsters and vehicles interact differently? Towering, line of sight, terrain interactions, leader interactions, indirect fire stuff, and problems, and how to counter all of these problems. So this is basically what's going to be on the menu for today as we are moving through the shooting phase. All right, first things first. Everyone is essentially always eligible to shoot if they have the appropriate keywords, even models without guns. So this can be a little bit confusing for you. So the reason why models without guns can still be eligible to shoot is because there's several actions inside the game, even though actions isn't really an official rule like it was in 9th. But for doing, say, cleanse or investigate site, I don't think investigate sites counts, but for doing things like cleanse, you have to be on the objective and you have to be able to not shoot or do melee, but you still have to be eligible to shoot and in order to be able to accomplish the cleanse action, for lack of a better term. So models without guns can still be eligible to shoot, even though they can't actually shoot. It's a little funky, but that's why it is. All right, so if you make a normal move, you're eligible to shoot. Everyone who makes a normal move is eligible to shoot in this game. If you advanced and you have an assault weapon, you're also going to count as eligible to shoot with the assault weapon. It's really important. Just because you have an assault weapon doesn't mean you could also advance and shoot with your other weapons. Then you're not eligible to shoot if you're in melee unless you're a monster vehicle or have a pistol. So those are basically all of the caveats we have. That's just the way it works. So like I said, that matters for actions such as cleanse and stuff. So don't need to show anything on TTS for this. That's just basically the way it works. You're more or less always eligible to shoot unless you advanced, and that can be countered by having an assault weapon and being in melee, which can be countered by having a pistol or being a monster/vehicle. It is important to note that for those actions, such as doing cleanse, it does stipulate that you cannot be engaged in melee. So just because you have a pistol in melee doesn't mean you could, fight and shoot and also do the action. I tried that, didn't work. I looked at the interactions. Dagnabbit. Okay, cool. So the next part of the shooting phase. These are the keywords. I'm just going to kind of run through these really fast. I'm going to actually just have all of these listed in the description down below so you guys can just copy and paste it if you need it. But it's also in the rule book, so you probably don't need to. This is just, I like how it's gathered here. So lethal means if you roll a 6 to hit, it auto-wounds, or rather on a critical hit, because there's some stratagems that can make a 5 at a critical hit. So lethal auto-wounds on a critical hit. Sustained auto-explodes on a critical hit, meaning you get 2 attacks on a critical hit. Anti, which will be anti-infantry, anti-vehicle, anti-whatever. Anti-psyker. Those wounds will cause critical wounds on a roll of whatever. So if you have anti-infantry 3 up, that means every roll of a 3 up counts as a critical wound against infantry. Devastating, convert damage to mortals on critical wounds. This is actually affected by damage reduction, so which can be a little bit tricky. We're actually going to change it to this because it looks like I actually kind of messed up with the layout. So let's just make this layout a little bit easier for everyone to read. Okay, so this actually can be a little bit tricky. So if you say, for example, you have a damage that causes damage flat 4 and it has devastating wounds, so you deal a natural roll of a 6 and they would take 4 mortal wounds. If they are, for some whatever reason, -1 damage, it'll actually only be 3 mortal wounds, which is a little bit different than it was last edition because damage reduction wouldn't work on mortal wounds, but it does with the Devastator keyword, or with the devastating wounds keyword. Then we have hazardous. So after your model shoots, after the wound roll, after the damage roll, after the save throw, you roll a hazardous roll. And on a 1-up, your model is destroyed. If it's a vehicle, monster, or character, they just take 3 flat mortal wounds. That is not reduced by damage reduction. Okay, then you have stealth. The unit is -1 to hit with ranged weapons. Doesn't apply to melee weapons. I know. Doesn't apply to them, so it's only with ranged weapons. Blast, +1 attack per multiples of 5 in the unit. So +1 for model units of 5 or more, +2 for say, units of 13, just for an example, etc., etc. Precision, you may allocate wound rolls to a visible leader model. Now, this is actually really important to understand, guys. Visible leader model. So just because you have precision doesn't mean you can allocate that wound unless you can see them. So the Vindicare Assassin, yes, it's still scary, but he does have to be able to see the leader he's trying to shoot. Then we're going to have Towering. Towering is a really powerful rule, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more in depth later on in today's presentation. Model always draws true line of sight to and from. Then we got Lone Operative. This unit cannot be targeted outside of 12 inches. This is freaking awesome. Heavy, +1 to hit if the entire unit remains stationary. So the way this is worded is the whole unit must remain stationary. So you can't have 2 models in the unit move and then the other ones get the heavy keyword to activate and give them +1 hit. Everything in the unit must remain stationary in order to proc this. Indirect, you do not need line of sight to fire this weapon. Twin Linked, reroll all wound rolls, very powerful. Torrent, auto hit, ignore cover, you ignore cover. Pistol, shooting into melee, and then Assault, you can advance and shoot. There's no more penalty to advancing and shooting like there was in the last edition. Okay, line of sight. This is going to refer to what you can see. Now, obscuring ruins line of sight. There's actually no keyword for obscuring, so I don't want to confuse people, so let me just delete that right there. And we're just going to say ruins obscure line of sight. Ruins of terrain pieces block line of sight. Maybe I could phrase that a little bit better. You know, this can be a little confusing, so I'm going to just switch to TTS and show you what that means. So true line of sight refers to what your models can actually see. And then your model can never shoot something it can't see unless it has an indirect weapon. So let me just go ahead and quickly jump over to the TTS view here so I can kind of explain this a little bit better because I think I wrote it maybe a little bit confusingly. And here's the TTS view. Cool. All right, so if you look at this terrain layout right here, this is going to be very standard for pretty much every tournament you go to. This right here is actually for the Alpine Cup, which is coming up, which looks suspiciously close to what some other types of tournaments are going to be running. And I've got a few different things placed here that can be really interesting for you. So right here, we have our Alaris Custodians, and they are not within this terrain, this ruin at all. So this is a ruin, and they're not within it. And they're not within the portfolio of this ruins, which means you can't see through, even if you could draw true line of sight. So these intercessors, which can draw true line of sight, can't see them because this platform counts as part of the ruin, and since I'm not touching it, then you can't see through it. So it's a little bit confusing for right now, but essentially what you want to look at is that this unit can't shoot me because they can't see me. I know how it sounds. It also is one of the reasons why this edition, while shooting has become much more powerful, shooting is also much more restricted. So sometimes we might get really upset because like, oh, shooting kills everything and melee is heavily nerfed. Well, it's true, but it's also very hard for shooting to be able to see them. To give you another example of how this would work, we have a Repulsor Executioner right now. It cannot possibly see these Terminators because it cannot get wholly within this terrain, which means it cannot see them. So ruins do obscure vision. Okay, now this Repulsor Executioner can see the little Vindicare Assassin we have here. So if you see him up here, the Repulsor Executioner can see him and they can shoot him. Same as for the Premier's Intercessors. The reason for this is because he is wholly within the terrain. This is also very important, and we'll go over this a little bit more in detail a little bit later in the presentation, but for right now, they can see the Vindicare. They cannot see the Alaris Terminators, and that does change a little bit, as I said. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right, cool. Now we are back to the PowerPoint. Hello, magical internet stuff. All right, so let's look at some terrain interactions, and this is going to be a little bit more in depth of what we were just talking about. So units wholly within terrain will get cover, and cover is very prevalent this edition, and essentially every single unit in the game is basically always going to have cover. There will be some niche situations where they won't, but they pretty much always will. The way cover works is it's going to apply +1 to the save characteristic of the model. It cannot improve a 3-up to a 2-up, however. So this is where people get a little bit confused by it, because it is worded a little funkily. So you can never take a 3-up armor save to a 2-up armor save via cover. The reason for this is GW doesn't want a Space Marine standing in cover getting a 2-up armor save against AP0 weapons. So it can be used, however, it can be used to ignore the very first AP. So let's say you have a 3-up armor save because you're a Space Marine and you're standing in cover and you're being shot with weapons that are AP 1. Well, you're still going to be effectively saving on a 3-up because you're at a 3-up armor save. You do get the cover, but you can't go to a 2-up. So essentially, you just ignore the first AP. And since there's only 1 AP, you're still a 3-up armor save. This works well for like Terminators because Terminators are going to be a 2-up armor save. So you put them in cover, and effectively now they are just ignoring the first blip of AP that comes their way. So cover is very powerful and it's very, very strong. Okay. Now, basically, anytime your model is going to be partially obscured by any cover or any terrain, any cover, you're going to get cover. This applies to everything in the entire game. Basically, anything that's going to be partially obscured by a ruin or most obstacles will get cover. This includes vehicles, guys, which is why shooting at range, you better have good AP if you're expecting to crack some tough targets. Now, it's going to be quite challenging. Now, only infantry will be able to benefit from being on craters and field pipes, and that is specific to the infantry keyword for how they will gain cover. But everything else, as long as they're partially obscured by debris or ruins or whatever, they're going to get cover. Now, being able to see through the terrain, and I'm about to demonstrate this again on TTS to clarify even more, because this is what's going to confuse the crap out of people. You must be wholly within the ruins to see through it. But models can see into it normally, even though they cannot see through it normally. So let me go back to the TTS, and I'm going to really hammer this so everyone's going to understand this crystal clear. And we're back to the TTS view. Okay, so going back to our previous little example here. We have a repulsor executioner. And this thing has all the guns in the world, and it wants to shoot. Well, right now, it cannot draw line of sight. So let's just try to see if we can draw a line of sight. It can't draw a line of sight to either the Vindicare Assassin or the Eversor Assassin, and it cannot draw a line of sight to the Terminators either. It also cannot be drawing line of... It actually, however, can draw line of sight to our Space Marines, because these Space Marines are touching the terrain. So since they're touching the terrain, they can see them. However, if these Space Marines were not touching the terrain, the Repulsor Executioner could not see them. Now, let's say this repulsor really wants to be able to see these assassins. Well, suddenly, it wants to be in the terrain. Now, in 9th edition, all it would have had to do is touch the terrain and it could see through it. That's not the truth in 10th edition anymore. So now he still can't see. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to figure out how do we get this repulsor executioner wholly within terrain. Now, this actually can be a little bit challenging. You'll just have to bear with me because of the physics engine here. This can actually be challenging. So this repulsor executioner can actually get wholly within the terrain. But there are going to be multiple times where a model can't possibly get wholly within this terrain. So for example, if it can't actually fit wholly within this terrain because you can see it sticking out. So there will be times when it's actually quite challenging. It can't see through this terrain right now because it cannot fit wholly within it. It's very challenging. But let's say but we're going to use the example right here. It's going to fit wholly within this terrain, okay? And it wants to shoot our assassins. Now, our assassins have a special rule called Lone Operator, which we spoke about a little bit earlier. So, can it shoot the Vindicare? Well, no, because the Vindicare is 16.7 inches away, and you cannot target a lone operative if they're more than 12 inches away. So even though the repulsor here can see the Vindicare, it cannot shoot it. That is only because the Vindicare has the keyword lone operative. Otherwise, it would be able to shoot the Vindicare. Can it see the Eversor? Yes, it can, because it's 11.8 inches away, which means it's within 12 inches. So this repulsor executioner can target the Eversor, which is bad for the Eversor. If the Eversor wanted to be safe from the repulsor executioner, he would have to be slightly off that objective so that he is no longer within 11 inches. So now he's 12.8, 12.1, and the repulsor can't shoot him anymore. Once again, we move him right back here. Suddenly he can be. Now that's the lone operative. The reason why the repulsor can see through this at all is because he's wholly within the terrain. Wholly means no piece of the model is not within the terrain. Okay, so that is how the interaction works here. Let's try it a little bit differently with these Space Marines here. Okay, so these Space Marines are trying to shoot our Alaris Terminators. However, they cannot target the Alaris Terminators. Let's see how we can actually make this work. So if we get to right here and they're touching, can they see through? No, they actually still cannot see through, because the way it's worded is the model must be wholly within the entire base, must be wholly within the terrain. So even though I'm touching the terrain, this Primaris Intercessor Sergeant cannot shoot the Terminators. Now, let's see if we put them in. So now, at this point, we have 2 models from the unit that are wholly within the terrain, which means only 2 models can shoot our Terminators, okay? That's the way it works. So as we are moving up the tabletop on this layout, which is looking like it's going to be a fairly standard layout, one of the things that you should be able to recognize right now is it's going to be very easy to hide your models as you're trying to advance up the tabletop. So if I have my Terminators right here, it's going to be very, very easy just to put them right here and not be seen. Because if we're trying to draw lines of sight, let's say I have my tank sitting right here, he cannot see my Terminators, even though it looks like the Terminators are like wide out in the open. And the reason why you can't see them is because it's covered by this terrain stamp. And because you can't draw a line through the terrain, it has to go through here. So that's just the line, and that's why it doesn't work. So it's actually very easy to move your infantry. This makes melee very powerful in this edition. Even though melee is a little bit weaker from the damage output, it also makes them very survivable in this new edition, which is why melee armies are actually not in a bad spot, even though initially people might think they're in a terrible spot. Now, I play Custodes and I play Orcs primarily, so I'm actually feeling really, really good now that I know that the new terrain is out. All right, now let's talk about that cover save just a little bit. If I have these Terminators and they're standing right here, and then I have one Terminator right here, and my Repulsor Executioner wants to shoot at my Terminators, which it can. Do my Terminators get cover here? Why, yes, they do. Because even though you can draw a straight line to the target, and he's not even in cover, part of the unit is wholly obscured. And if even a little bit of the unit is obscured, then the whole unit's going to be getting cover, which is super, super annoying. All right, so that's the way that works. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint, and we will be back at TTS at another, in just a little bit, even though we are actually closing in pretty good on how this shooting tutorial works. The PowerPoint has returned. Cool, that's terrain interactions. Now let's talk about selecting targets. I'm going to choose you. So when a unit is selected to shoot, you must declare all shots in the unit before you roll any dice at all, and this is really, really important, because if, say, you shoot half your guns, and then you notice, oh, my half guns happen to wipe the squad. Well, let me now declare the other half of my guns into another unit. That's a really unfair advantage. So you're not allowed to have knowledge of what would happen in the future. So before you shoot any weapons, you must declare where all of your shots are going. It's also important that you resolve all of the shots with one particular weapon profile before moving on to another weapon profile. So in the case of that Repulsor Executioner, we must shoot all of its las cannons before we move on to the heavy bolters. You can't shoot one las cannon, shoot heavy bolters, then go back to another las cannon. No, you must shoot all the las cannons, then all the heavy bolters, then all of the whatever next. So you can split your weapons as much as you want. So for example, if I want to, hey babe, could you close the door? If you want to, never mind. So if you want to go ahead and be firing your weapons in multiple different ways, then it'd be really nice if you just go, okay, listen, I am now going to shart all of my las cannon shots into the Terminators, and I'm going to shoot all of my heavy bolters into the Space Marines. Sorry, guys, it just started raining out for a minute. I was asking my wife to close it. She was a peach and helped. So that's how you're going to split your attacks. I'm going to shoot all the las cannons into the Terminators. I'm going to shoot all the heavy bolters into the Space Marines. And then once you've declared all of your targets, you will then start rolling dice. Cool. Now let's talk about monsters and vehicles. Monsters and vehicles are pretty dang cool now. They can shoot and they can be shot in melee. They will, however, suffer a -1 to hit when shooting, except with pistols. Although you're almost never going to see a monster vehicle that has pistols, so that rarely is going to come up. Now enemies are also going to suffer a -1 to shoot your monster vehicle if they're in melee, unless they're being shot with pistols by the unit that's engaged with. Monsters and vehicles can shoot blast out of melee at a -1 to hit. What did all that mean? Let's go back to TTS, and I'm going to show you what it means, because hearing me read this and reading it yourself might be nice, but nothing works better than pictures. So let us get some pictures of this. All right, so let's say we have these Terminators sitting right here in the middle, and they are going to be engaged with this knight. So we're in melee, we're fighting. And the Terminators are being backed up by some Space Marines for, I don't know, whatever reason, because this is just weird. Now, we're engaged, and my tank wants to shoot the knight. Well, in this edition, good news, I can't. So the Repulsor Executioner is going to be putting all of its guns into the knight, even though they're engaged in melee. But they will suffer a -1 to hit penalty, and obviously the knight will be getting cover because he's partially obscured from the ruins here. So you can shoot things that are in melee, just at a -1 to hit. Now, this knight, he has to put all of his guns into the unit that he's in close combat with. So his Gatling gun, everything like that, directly into the models that he's engaged with the exception of his blast weapons. His blast weapons cannot shoot into melee, but they can shoot out of melee. So he can shoot his blast weapons at this repulsor or at this assassin. The other guns are going to have to go into the Alaris Terminators. And all of his shots are also going to be at a -1 to hit. So no longer can you hide a monster vehicle just by tagging them in combat, and no longer can you stop them from shooting, although you really couldn't anyway. But the blast weapons can always shoot out of melee, and this is really important. I ran into this in a matchup against Necrons, where I was playing against a Seraptic Construct, which just shot all of its blast weapons out of melee and crushed me anyway. Thank you, Shetzel, my teammate. Okay, so then let's move on into the presentation. Back to the PowerPoint. Yep, okay, and we're back. So, towering. This is one of the last rules that we really need to talk about today. Towering is an exceptionally powerful rule, and because of this, you're actually starting to see many tournaments change the way that the terrain works. So towering allows you to draw true line of sight, regardless of terrain. Basically, it means knights can and always will be able to shoot you if there's windows that you're hiding behind. So let me explain a little bit better on the TTS view. If we go back to TTS, we have the knight, and he's hanging out right here. And then we're going to have the Alaris Custodians right here. No longer am I limited by not being able to shoot these Terminators. Because if we get down onto the model-to-model view, where these Terminators are, sorry, there's a little line here, but there's a window, and you can draw a straight line through the window to this knight, which means he can see my Terminators and shoot, because he has the towering keyword. Now, the Repulsor Executioner cannot do this, because it does not have the towering keyword, but the knight does. So he can shoot and obliterate these Terminators right now. Or more likely, he can shoot and obliterate these Space Marines here, which is also very scary. It means you're not hiding from knights. So once again, this Repulsor Executioner cannot shoot the Space Marines, but the knight can because of the towering keyword. Because of this, many new tournament scenes are going to be implementing, I'm not going to say which, but they're going to be implementing a rule that says all ruins count of having no windows on the first floor, and that will help quite a bit. The flip side of the Knight's Towering rule is that, yes, they can see you, but you can also see them. So if you have some dedicated anti-tank that wants to stand behind ruins, you can shoot them. Now, you do still get a cover save here, but it's quite scary. So Knights are very, very powerful right now, but if more tournaments adopt this closed windows rule for the small ruins, maybe that will be a big help. But as of right now, Knights are strong, even though, remember, he still can't target the Vindicator here because of the lone operative rule. All right, so closing it out, we've just got 2 more slides that we need to go through, and we're going to talk about leaders. Leaders are a little bit confusing, but they're super, super cool, and they're super important to talk about. So no damage can ever be allocated to a leader until all other models in the unit are dead. So this is to stop people from, say, targeting a unit of Custodians, and then Trajan just says, oh, hey, I have a 2-up invuln, I'll just tank everything by myself. Yeah, they're not going to allow that. They're going to mean that you must always allocate damage to the unit first. The only exception to this is when you're targeting the unit with the precision keyword. So if you have, say, sniper units that have precision, they can choose to allocate the wounds to the character model, at which point the character will have to use their own personal saving throw against those rolls. Now, even though you're targeting the character, you actually still roll against the toughness of the unit. So if you have a unit that is, say, toughness 6 and your leader is a toughness of 4, your leader will actually still benefit from the toughness of the unit because you still have to wound against the unit. This also, on the flip side, can mean that if you're targeting a unit that has a lower toughness than your leader can get screwed a little bit. So let's think about a Hive Tyrant, and he's got some Tyrant Guard with him. Well, the Hive Tyrant's toughness is a lot higher than the Tyrant Guard, but if you're shooting with precision and you want to allocate it towards the Hive Tyrant, well, you're rolling to wound against the unit, which makes it easier to wound the Hive Tyrant than if he was just by himself. So it's a little bit funky the way it works, but that is the way it works. Now, the little trick and the question that everyone is going to have is, if a leader unit has damage allocated to them, do you have to continue taking damage on them, or does it go back to the unit? Well, the answer is no. You do not continue taking damage on that leader unless it's more precision attacks that go into them. Even if your leader is damaged, so Trajan Valoris is leading a unit of Wardens and he takes 4 wounds. Once you're shooting without precision, you're shooting with normal weapons, the rest of the damage goes to the unit before it goes to Trajan. That is the way it works. So normal rules for allocating damage is always going to be you must apply damage to the damage model already. The exception is for leader units. Leaders do not need to continue receiving damage unless it does have that precision keyword. And just remember, guys, because this will get a little bit confusing, when damaging a unit, roll against the highest non-leader toughness in the unit. This is how the Gretchen bomb works for orcs. This is how the Ogren bodyguard works for the Imperial Guard. You always roll against the highest toughness in the unit. Okay? Then let's just finish it up. Indirect. Okay. So I have a bunch of fire here because Indirect is a disaster. Indirect is very, very powerful. Now, these units can actually fire and shoot you even if they cannot see you. However, they will suffer a -1 to hit penalty, and the enemy automatically gets cover. The problem with this is that it kind of looks like basically every single Indirect gun in the game ignores cover. So more or less there's no penalty to Indirect, and because a lot of them are also heavy weapons which get the +1 to hit, which kind of cancels out the -1 to hit. So they are extremely powerful, and I think they are a little bit of a problem. But seeing as other shooting is nerfed because of the way that line of sight interactions work that I showed you, maybe Indirect is okay. So that's what we're doing with Indirect today, guys. All right, now there are a few problems with all of this, but overall it works really, really well. People are going to complain that, oh, shooting's ineffective. It's not ineffective. Shooting's actually a lot better than it used to be. However, now that melee actually is a lot worse, it gives the melee troops an opportunity to actually make it up the field and get into combat. Currently, right now, our melee-based armies actually score better than our shooting-based armies because of the elimination of faction-specific secondaries, which I think was an amazing touch to the game. I'm so glad they're gone. So melee armies, while actually nerfed and doing less damage than our shooting armies, are actually tend to be scoring better. So there is an inherent balance to the game. This is really important in the context of the type of terrain layouts that we're using. So if you're using a terrain layout like the one I have demonstrated right here, what you'll find is it's actually going to be fairly dang balanced because your shooting units will hit a heck of a lot harder than our melee units, but it's also going to be pretty hard for them to draw a line of sight, with the exception of our knights. But remember, if the knights can see you, you can also see them, which is a problem as well. So that is the way this goes, guys. That's basically everything I have to talk about with the shooting phase. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. If you do, please like and subscribe and share this with your friends. So we've already gone through the movement phase. Today we went through the shooting phase. We will be going through the charge and fight phases. And then what we'll also be doing is doing a pregame phase. Like how does the infiltrate and scout moves and all that work as well. Once we make it through all that, I'm going to start breaking down really specific interactions. So move blocking, screening, how does all of this stuff work? And we're going to be going into detail everything until we all master this game and we become really good wargamers. Until then, what I want you guys to do is to start playing with more or less this type of terrain layout because that's what you're going to see throughout 10th edition. Now, GW, when they release their official layouts, maybe it looks a little bit different. But with these, with the base for all of the ruins and the terrain, guys, this is what it's going to basically be. So if you have been looking at this game, you're like, wow, shooting is so overpowered. What I think you're going to realize is it's really not in the context for how the terrain is meant to be in the game. 10th edition is fantastic. It is so much fun. It's actually a huge improvement over 9th edition. Yes, there are currently some exploits from the indexes, but that's the inherent nature of indexes, and Games Workshop is fixing it. So in the context of the way the terrain is going to be played, guys, this game is looking really fantastic with a few, exploitive exceptions. Looking at you, Eldar. But besides that, everyone, everything is awesome. I love having you all here. If you have any questions, please put it in the comment section. As you all know, I will respond to basically every single comment that I can get to, which is, I think right now I'm batting pretty close to 100. I respond to just about everything, even on the videos with like thousands of views. So I love you all. Thanks you for your attention. Hope you all have an amazing day. And until next time, happy crumping, my wargamers.